Welcome to the Partis channel. Today we explain Prophets Isaiah chapter 8 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're looking at a text that opens with some serious, high-stakes drama. We're talking prophetic signs, a newborn baby with an unbelievably strange name, and the terrifying threat of an ancient invasion. In this explainer, we're going to break down Isaiah chapter 8 from start to finish. We'll look really closely at its ancient metaphors and its stark historical realities, all using a highly structured, visual approach. So let's get right into it.
To make sure we cover everything clearly, here's our roadmap for today. First, approaching the text. Second, the prophetic sign. Third, Shiloah versus the river. Fourth, the Assyrian flood. And finally, lessons from Isaiah.
All right, let's kick things off with section 1, approaching the text.
Now, before we read a single verse, I want to clarify the specific interpretive method we're using today. It's called Peshat. Peshat is simply the plain, literal meaning of a text within its actual historical context. I want to assure you right up front that we are completely avoiding any complex, mystical interpretations today. There are going to be no deep hidden symbols, no Sod, and no Kabbalah. We're focusing purely on the straightforward historical meaning of the text.
We're anchoring our focus in the authentic 1917 Jewish Publication Society Masoretic text, and we'll be walking through the entire 22 verses of chapter 8. But first, let's set the stage with a little bit of context. Isaiah is speaking to the people of Judah during a time of immense geopolitical stress. Surrounding nations, specifically Aram and the northern kingdom of Israel, are actively posturing for war against Judah. As you can imagine, the people are absolutely terrified. They're facing a massive crisis of faith, paired with a very real crisis of national security. Let's see exactly how this unfolds step by step.
Moving on to section 2, the prophetic sign.
Let's break down the chronological actions right at the start of the chapter, in verses 1 through 3. First, the Lord says to Isaiah, "Take thee a great tablet, and write upon it in common script." This isn't some secret diary entry. This is a public, highly visible action intended for literally everyone in the street to see and understand clearly. Second, he actually writes the prophecy down on this tablet. Third, Isaiah takes faithful witnesses to record this. The text specifically names Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. These are highly reliable, prominent guys in Jerusalem. They're there to verify that the prophet wrote this specific warning down way before any of the historical events actually happened. It totally ensures the prophecy's authenticity. And fourth, Isaiah goes to the prophetess, his wife. She conceives, and they're commanded to name their newborn son.
And guys, in verse 3, an incredibly unusual name is given to Isaiah's child. God says, "Call his name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz." I mean, that is a massive, attention-grabbing name for a kid. But that's exactly the point. The child himself actually serves as a walking, breathing, physical prophetic sign to everyone living in the nation of Judah.
So what does it mean? Let's break down this intimidating Hebrew name into its plain English translation to reveal its message. Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz literally translates to, "The spoil speedeth, the prey hasteth." It's an urgent, straightforward, and honestly terrifying message about impending conquest. It basically means a ruthless enemy is rapidly approaching to seize the spoil and hurry away with the prey.
Now, let's look at verse 4 and see how this logically builds. The child's natural, physical development actually acts as a ticking clock. The text says, "For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, 'My father,' and 'My mother,' the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be carried away before the king of Assyria." Now, to put that into perspective, Damascus was the capital of Aram, and Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, those were the two powers currently threatening Judah. What Isaiah is saying is that before this newborn toddler even learns to speak his first basic words, the great riches of these rival powers will fall. The king of Assyria is coming to utterly destroy them, and the timeline for their destruction is tied directly to this little infant's physical growth.
Now we transition into section 3, Shiloah versus the river. In verses 5, 6, and 7, the text shifts from physical actions into this really powerful, vivid metaphor. The Lord speaks to Isaiah saying the people have refused the waters of Shiloah that go softly. Now, these quiet waters of Shiloah represent the gentle, sustaining provision and wisdom of the Lord. They were an actual slow-moving water source right there in Jerusalem. But instead of trusting that gentle wisdom, the people are out there rejoicing with foreign, worldly powers. They're looking to political maneuvering and the sheer military might of nations to solve their problems with Rezin and Ramaleah's son. And because they rejected those soft divine waters, they are going to face an impending, overwhelming force, the violently flowing waters of the river, mighty and many.
The best part is, the text doesn't leave us guessing what this means. It clearly defines the metaphor directly in verse 7. It says the mighty river represents
even the king of Assyria and all his glory. It says he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. You see, the people of Judah thought that Syria would just deal with their enemies, Damascus and Samaria, and leave them alone. But when you refuse the gentle, soft waters of faith and invite in a geopolitical tidal wave, you simply cannot control it. Assyria is not just going to stop at Israel and Aram. Those destructive floodwaters are going to breach their banks and head straight for Judah.
And that brings us to section 4, the Assyrian flood. I want to read this striking imagery straight from verse 8 and just give it a second to breathe. It says, "The river shall sweep through Judah, overflowing as he passeth through. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel." Let's visualize that for a second. The terrifying floodwaters of the Assyrian army rise right up to the neck of the land. They don't quite drown the head, meaning the city of Jerusalem itself narrowly survives, but the entire breadth of the surrounding land is totally submerged under the destructive wings of this invasion. And note that final, absolutely crucial phrase, O Emmanuel, which translates to God is with us. This actually leads us directly into verses 9 and 10, where the tone suddenly dramatically shifts. Because the land belongs to Emmanuel, because God is with Judah, Isaiah essentially issues a taunt to the invading nations. He says, "Make an uproar, O ye peoples, and ye shall be broken in pieces." He tells all these far-off countries to gird themselves to get ready for battle, but he promises they will ultimately be shattered. They can hold all the counsels they want, they can speak the word, but it shall not stand. Why? He repeats it again, "For God is with us." Even though the flood reaches the neck, the nation is not going to completely drown because of God's presence. Following this, in verses 11 through 15, the Lord speaks to Isaiah with a strong hand, warning him not to walk in the way of this panicked, terrified populace. Verse 12 says, "Say ye not, a conspiracy, concerning all whereof this people do say, a conspiracy. Neither fear ye their fear, nor account it dreadful." Think about it. The people of Judah are terrified of the political alliances forming against them. They're totally panicked by the news of the day. But God tells Isaiah to step back from the paranoia. In verse 13 he commands, "The Lord of hosts, him shall ye sanctify. And let him be your fear, and let him be your dread." The message here is so clear. If you fear God, you don't need to fear the geopolitical conspiracies of men. Verse 14 promises that for those who do this, the Lord will be a sanctuary. However, for both houses of Israel who refuse, he becomes a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offense, basically a snare that many are going to stumble over, fall, and be broken by. Moving into verses 16 through 18, we get to see Isaiah's personal response to all of this. He says, "Bind up the testimony, seal the instruction among my disciples." Isaiah is securing the prophetic message. He resolves to patiently wait for the Lord, who is currently hiding his face from the house of Jacob. In verse 18, Isaiah points to himself and his uniquely named children, like little Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz, stating, "Behold, I and the children whom the Lord have given me shall be for signs and for wonders in Israel." Their very lives, their literal names, are living, breathing proof of the prophecy. Finally, in verses 19 through 22, the chapter concludes with a really stark warning against seeking false guidance. As the Assyrian threat looms larger and desperation sets in, the people are going to be tempted to seek supernatural help outside of God. Verse 19 describes people saying, "Seek unto the ghosts and the familiar spirits that chirp and that mutter." They want to consult necromancers and mediums. Isaiah's response is incredibly logical and sharp. Should not a people seek unto their God, on behalf of the living unto the dead? I mean, why in the world would the living consult the dead instead of the living God? In verse 20, he points them right back to the teaching and to the testimony, back to the law. He warns that if they don't speak according to God's word, there is absolutely no light in them. The chapter then ends with a grim description of the consequences in verses 21 and 22. Those who turn to these false hopes will pass through the land sore bestead and hungry. In their hunger and their blinding anger, they will curse their king and their God. They will look up to heaven and down to the earth, but they are only going to see distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish. It's a chilling conclusion for sure. Turning away from the plain truth of God's instruction to chase worldly power or occult superstitions, it ends only in total darkness. All right, let's wrap things up with section 5, Lessons from Isaiah.
So, what are the practical takeaways we can extract from this straightforward reading of the chapter? First, physical actions can serve as incredibly powerful messages. Just like Isaiah's giant tablet and the naming of his children as living signs, sometimes the truth needs to be made highly visible in our own lives. Second, gentle wisdom is often foolishly rejected in favor of flashy alliances. The people ignored the quiet waters of Shiloah and chased after worldly strength instead. Third, the illusion of worldly power brings disaster. We just cannot control the rivers we invite in. Once that Assyrian flood came over the banks, it reached all the way to the neck of Judah. Fourth, as we saw in the later verses, we absolutely must not be swept away by the paranoia and the conspiracies of the masses. If our reverence is directed toward God, we don't need to dread the political shifting of nations. And finally, when we're facing deep distress, we have to look to true established wisdom, the teaching and the testimony, rather than frantically consulting dark, empty superstitions that only lead to gloom.
So I'll leave you with this question to think about. When facing our own overwhelming conflicts, do we seek the gentle waters of wisdom or rely on raging rivers we cannot control? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.